I've been editing YouTube videos for more than 5 years now, and I've had to go through my own frustrated grind of figuring out how to speed up my process and to make my edits way more enjoyable and quicker for me. But now I've developed loads of interesting and helpful techniques and mindsets that speed up anyone's workflow and also make the process of editing itself way more enjoyable. This isn't your typical do J-cuts to be faster advice video. What I'm about to share are universal techniques, mindsets, and philosophies that you can develop around various different types of projects that you might be creating, helping to make the art of editing way more enjoyable and helping to get you through those times when your motivation is sorely lacking. Okay, let's start. Not editing in a linear order. When we begin working on an edit, we often start in a linear fashion. So we'll start editing the first section and then we'll slowly build up the edit and move through in a linear fashion all the way to the end of the edit, which is fine for the first few hours, but as your energy starts to wane, so will your motivation, and you'll be right at the start of the edit still, maybe like 1/4 of the way in, and you'll just feel this massive chasm of empty space in your timeline, and you'll just feel so far away from actually being anywhere near close to finishing it. My strategy around this issue is to hop around to work on different sections of your edit when your energy starts to feel a lot lower. Doing this makes me see how the previous pieces that I've edited can lead into these new sections, which also has the added benefit of making me feel like I've made more progress overall, even though technically I've basically made the same amount of progress versus if I was to continue building up the first section. But because there's no longer this wide chasm of space that needed to be filled with A-roll and animations and overlays and music, it weirdly tricks my brain into thinking that I'm close to having a full draft almost there. If you're feeling a lot of friction for the part of the edit that you're working on, and for whatever reason the particular project that you have makes it impractical for you to, work on it in these individual sections, then you can try working on different tasks for the specific part of the edit that you're on. Maybe start layering music and sound effects already, or start adding a basic color grade on your footage. You're gonna have to do these tasks anyway later down the line, so if that makes you feel, like you're making more progress, adding all these different elements to make up the rest of your edit, and this in turn helps with your energy and motivation because you feel like you can see the light for what could be the end result of this part of the edit. It'll help you get back in the groove so you can tackle those, much more less interesting elements of your edit later on. Aim for the minimal viable product. Perfectionism is a creative ailment that affects a lot of us, and I'm not immune to this either, especially when you're the one staring at a screen for hours on end where all of the imperfections are right in front of your face. If you don't have a super strict deadline, this is even more of a challenge to figure out when a project is truly done, because it's never truly done. You can keep working on it for as long as you feel like it, putting in more hours to improve and tweak all of the things that you keep noticing. So whenever I'm working on an edit, I aim to first get it to a level where it's at MVP, or minimal viable product. This basically means that if I was to hit the export button on this project right now, not amazing, not one of the most mind-blowing edits you've ever done, but good enough so that when someone watches it, they would get the overall message, the overall feeling that you're trying to give them and convey in it. It's often the dread of how far away you are from finishing that project that can often cause you a lot of stress, especially if you have a deadline ominously hovering over your head all the time. Oh, it's there, no, it's coming close. If you just aim for MVP, which is much closer than any kind of perfectionism that you have in your head, you'll know that in the worst case scenario, if you didn't manage your time properly to really tweak and finesse the edit, you can at least get a version out that is good enough, and one that even you yourself would be happy with, even if there was so many other things that you could have done to really improve it. Remember, most people are not going to notice those parts in the finished project that should have been improved. Unlike you, who's been watching the edit for hours and hours and hours, they'll most likely just be happy with the version that they get. And if they aren't, it's probably because your minimum viable product was just too low. So aim for minimum viable product first, then go beyond this with the time that you have remaining on the project. If you have just one more day on your edit, then those final 6 to 8 hours should be about taking your project beyond the MVP line, improving the viewer's experience by adding in a few more rotoscoping animations, and swapping out that music track for a much more suited one that will make that particular scene way better. A key point with having this mindset is that it's actually going to help you figure out how long different types of projects take to get to the status of being a minimum viable product, which will then better help you time manage yourself because you'll know you have 5 days to do an edit and you'll aim for day 3 to be the one where you get it to an MVP status, and then you have your final 2 days to get it finessed and take it above that level. Rather than getting to 3 hours before your deadline and you're just rushing to get all these little tweaks and things that you want to do to elevate it, and then you export out the project and you've just got a bad taste in your mouth left from feeling way more stressed and rushed and having a project and an output that is just not at the level that you would ever want it to be. Tracking your time with an app like Toggl is a really good step in the right direction for you to get clear, unquestionable data about how long it actually took you to do certain tasks and certain things within specific stages of your project. Remember, perfect is the enemy of good, and it's better to keep your edits released on schedule and your clients happy than to create a perfect edit that gets delayed because, well, for one, your definition of what perfection is going to be entirely different to what somebody else's. And the bad impression that you've created because of your late delivery of the project is way more detrimental than the advantage of doing any extra fancy rotoscoping work. Make custom keyboard shortcuts. There's some editors out there that I've heard saying things like, oh, you should stick to the default shortcuts because you never know when you're going to be working on a computer that isn't your own when you edit. And they have a point, I guess, but in my opinion, it's definitely not worth sticking with an app's default shortcuts just to mitigate against the times when, you know, the rare occasions when you're not going to be sat at your computer actually working on a project. The default shortcuts in editing apps are often super inefficient and require you to use way more of your keyboard than you ever actually need to, when instead you can condense all of the regular daily actions that you're going to be doing to just the left side of your keyboard. This means that your hand basically stays in the same place almost all of the time, and that you can trigger all of these gestures with barely any movement. These custom actions may only be about half a second faster than using the app's default shortcuts, but add this up over days and days, months and months, and that is going to amount to some pretty significant time. I have a whole video explaining my super secret speedy editing shortcuts up here, but just to give you a brief overview. Speed editing relies on you moving your hand and mouse off these positions for as little as possible, so that your left and right hand alone can act as all of the keyboard shortcuts that you're ever going to need. It'll take some time to get used to this new mapping, especially if you've been using the defaults for many years in the current app that you're using, but trust me, if you stick with this, it's going to become second nature and you're going to be flying around the software like you're some kind of badass hacker. End your session on a high. You've had a really great edit session and you want to finish up for the night, so you power through for an extra 10 minutes to get those animations finished on your intro. Phew, done. Off to bed now. But then the morning comes and you get back to your desk and wait, what was I gonna be working on next again? It might seem logical to wrap up your work on the current subtask that you're working on, but with creative work, I actually find this method makes it way more difficult for you to restart your flow after you've had your break. The friction, if you pick up from where you left off when you were doing a particular edit action, feels way less to me because you have a much clearer memory of how you were feeling when you were in the middle of this, the day previously or the couple hours previous. And because you've already made progress with this subtask rather than getting stuck in analysis paralysis about, you know, what should I start working on next? It just tends to get you back into editing way easier. Also, if you're closer to finishing a particular task, you'll feel way more inclined to bridge that gap and actually finish it, which will in turn give you the motivation and satisfaction to, you know, feel good about yourself that, hey, I just ticked another thing off that I needed to be done. And that will then lead you to working on the next thing that will give you those same happy feelings. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, talks about something quite similar to this, which is a term known as the Goldilocks rule, where to get into a flow state, a task has to be of just manageable difficulty and not too difficult, because then you'll start to feel demotivated. Starting up a task that you were midway through, especially if you were enjoying it and it was a little bit challenging, is the Goldilocks zone that you should be stopping your work at when you're finished for the day. It's the secret motivation hack that'll slowly creep up to about an 8 out of 10 in terms of overall motivation and drive, which would normally take about an hour-ish to get there, versus hitting the same number of 8 out of 10 motivation, but this time done within just the space of 5 to 10 minutes. Don't half-ass your project organization. It's easy to think that you can just add in footage into your editing app of choice and just start editing right away because time is money and I want to make a lot of it. But once your project fills up, your timeline and folders that you may or may not have created are going to start to get messy and cluttered unless you stay on top of it. You still might be able to navigate around it because you've gotten so used to this terrible organization. But this messy workspace is just going to add an extra amount of stress on you, even if you don't realize that it's coming from this. It's the equivalent of editing when your desk is all messy versus it being all clean and organized. Sure, you can still deal with it and get your work done when you've got, dirty plates right next to you, but it's going to feel way nicer doing this with a nice plant and a nice soft desk mat that you can rest your hands on. A good rule of thumb that I like to follow about how much I should organize a project or anything that I'm working on is that if I was to pass off this project file to another editor, would they be able to navigate around the project? Would they be able to find the timelines? Would they be able to find those sound effects that I put in there? Or would they just be confused and spend more time trying to find stuff than actually editing the thing? For your timeline, this means keeping a consistent language for what is contained within each track. That, for example, means that all A-roll clips are in track 1, B-roll clips only live in video track 2, sound effects are labeled a different color than what your dialogue and your music is, and the list goes on and on and on depending on how complicated your edit is. I'd recommend that you make a default project with folders organized and even timelines organized if you want to go that far, so that whenever you're starting a new project, you don't have to mess around with a lot of this organization. You can already build a system that is ready for you to drag and drop files in, so right off the bat, it's a nice and clean workspace and you're motivated to keep it that way. And once you repeat the system for every project that you set up, it's gonna feel like second nature, and the day when you have to hop into that old project of yours, you're gonna be like, oh, get it away from me. If you want to learn some other practical tips for how to edit faster, you should definitely check out this video over here, where I walk you through my high-speed edit shortcuts that I use on every single project. Click that subscribe button, because if you do, I'm gonna sit on your desk and give you that editing encouragement that you've been craving. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.